what is a human life actually worth? Like, if you ask a frontline nurse, the answer is obviously that it's priceless, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, you do whatever it takes for as long as it takes. But if you take that same question and you ask a hospital's risk management department or, their legal team or the financial board who's calculating insurance liabilities, the answer is definitely not priceless.
Well, it is decidedly not.
Right. In some of the mathematical models we're looking at today, the value of an average professional's remaining life is exactly $2 million.
It's just a staggering disconnect, honestly. On one side of the hospital walls, you have these strictly biological rules. And then on the other side, inside the executive boardroom, you have mathematical rules. And they basically never meet.
Which is exactly what we're going to get into today. Welcome back, by the way. I'm your host, and we're so glad you're joining us for this.
Yes, welcome. I'm excited to be here as always.
And to our listener, the learner, this is a custom-tailored deep dive just for you. We are diving into a really fascinating, sometimes pretty frustrating, but I think ultimately empowering intersection of healthcare, strategic leadership, and just hard-nosed finance.
Yeah, it's a unique blend. We're looking at why the very people who are trusted to save our lives are rarely the ones trusted to manage the budgets.
Exactly. And more importantly, how mastering a very specific financial toolkit is essentially the only way clinical experts can finally break through that glass ceiling and claim a seat at the decision-making table.
Which is so critical right now. The materials you provided for us to synthesize today focus really heavily on this evolution in healthcare education, specifically the Doctor of Nursing Practice, or the DNP.
Right. We have a text on DNP education, a really detailed presentation on strategic planning and capital budgeting, and this extensive, honestly amazing lecture transcript on something called the time value of money.
Yeah, and these DNP programs are essentially functioning as a Trojan Horse. I mean, they are taking master clinicians and secretly arming them with a vocabulary of corporate strategy and finance.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start right at the heart of the fiction with what is basically a massive structural paradox in how we run healthcare.
The numbers are wild here.
They really are.
Yeah.
If we look at the data, and there's a benchmark here from the Health Resources and Services Administration going all the way back to 2008, we are talking about a workforce of over 3 million nurses nationwide.
3 million. It's a literal army.
An army, and they have this unparalleled potential to shape healthcare, right? I mean, they're the ones constantly with the patients.
Exactly. Because of their sheer numbers and that unblinking contact with the patient population, they see what actually works. They see where the supply chain is breaking down on a Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah.
They see which protocols save time and which ones are just, bureaucratic red tape causing bottlenecks in the ICU.
But, and this is where I really struggle to accept the reality of the situation, there is this profound gap. So there was this landmark survey conducted by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation around 2010.
The opinion leader survey.
Right. And they didn't just poll a few random people. They went after over 1,500 major opinion leaders across government, industry, academia, and the results were just a massive reality check.
Brutally honest.
Yeah, it revealed that while nurses are universally trusted, like arguably the most trusted professionals in the entire system, they're just not viewed as important decision makers.
And perhaps more critically, from a business standpoint, they are not viewed as revenue generators, especially when the corporate system compares them to physicians.
Right.
The prevailing perception is that doctors bring the money in through procedures and billing, and nursing is just a sunk cost. They're viewed purely as an operating expense.
Wait, I have to push back on that premise a bit because I think a lot of people listening will find that incredibly insulting.
Oh, it is insulting.
I just struggle to accept that a hospital board views a highly trained professional, someone who can, run a code and keep a human being alive on a ventilator purely as an operating expense, like electricity or surgical gauze. I mean, isn't that a massive failure of the healthcare model itself?
It is absolutely a failure of the model, but it's a failure rooted in a language barrier, I think. The board doesn't undervalue the clinical work intentionally. They just don't have a metric for it that fits nicely into their spreadsheets. If a clinician doesn't speak the language of business and strategy, the executives in the boardroom simply cannot hear them. They're on completely different frequencies.
You could have a brilliant nurse who knows exactly why a certain ward is just hemorrhaging money due to inefficient staffing.
Exactly. But if they walk into a budget meeting and talk about patient fatigue and moral injury, the finance executives will just nod politely and go right back to their financial models.
Because the executives only speak in terms of capital allocation and margins and market share.
Right. And there's a noteworthy quote from a physician in the source materials that calls this out explicitly. They say it's essential to support nurses taking leadership roles, and that their voices are desperately needed at those decision-making tables.
But just asking for a seat at the table doesn't actually work, does it?
No, it never does. You have to take it. And you can only take it if you understand the rules of the game being played at that specific table.
Which brings us to the solution, the emergence of the doctor of nursing practice. Now, for anyone outside the medical field listening, when you hear doctor of nursing, you probably immediately picture a PhD, right?
Yeah, someone in a white coat in a university lab, maybe running clinical trials on mice or writing massive research papers.
Exactly. But the DNP is fundamentally different. It is a terminal degree, so the highest you can go, but it's specifically a non-research clinical doctorate.
Right. The American Association of Colleges of Nursing, the AACN, defines it as being focused entirely on nursing practice and developing executive leaders. It's not about writing theory. It's about applying theory to fix broken systems.
And the momentum behind this is huge. Looking at the ACN data from a decade ago, in 2013, there were already over 217 of these DNP programs actively enrolling students.
With nearly 100 more in development at that time.
That represents a massive systemic push to arm frontline clinicians with a real executive toolkit. It's like being the most skilled mechanic in the factory, but having no say in how the factory is designed or what cars it builds.
That's a great way to put it.
You know how the engine works better than anyone alive, but management only speaks in spreadsheets.
And to get into that management room, the mechanic or the nurse needs a very specific toolkit. The first tool is understanding how the entire organization figures out its direction in the first place. You have to zoom all the way out.
So let's zoom out. Let's look at how a hospital actually figures out what it's supposed to be doing. This leads us to strategic planning. And looking at the presentation slides we have on this, they walk through a framework called strategic mission fulfillment.
Which can sound a bit dry at first.
Oh, it initially feels like a game of corporate bingo. You have words like formulation, operationalizing, execution, and monitoring. It sounds like an MBA textbook just threw up on a whiteboard.
It does sound deeply bureaucratic, I'll give you that. But the models describe it as a systematic, cyclical, dynamic, four-stage approach. It's really just the nursing process applied to a corporation.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, in nursing, you assess, diagnose, plan, implement, and evaluate. Strategic mission fulfillment is exactly that, but applied to the whole hospital.
And that steering starts at the top, right, with the governing board delegating to executive leadership. But the foundation of all of this is the very first stage, which is strategy formulation.
Right, where the organization defines its vision, its mission, and its values.
And again, I look at these words and I immediately think of those motivational posters, you know, with an eagle soaring over a mountain in an HR waiting room. Is this just corporate speak?
That is how they're usually treated, which is why so many strategic plans fail, honestly. If we break down the mechanics, they serve very distinct functions. A vision statement is purely forward-looking.
Okay.
It describes what the firm aspires to be in the future. It has to be inspirational, but it also has to be something you can measure.
So the vision is the destination. Like, we want to be the premier cardiac center in the Midwest by 2035. Then the mission is the vehicle.
Yes, the mission encompasses the broad purpose, the what. Unlike the vision, the mission is present-oriented and actionable. It's about what you're doing right now to get there.
And then you have the values. The models define values as the how framework. This is where I think the rubber meets the road.
It really is. Values aren't just nice words. They are concrete criteria. They're used for problem-solving, conflict resolution, and what strategists call permission-to-play evaluations.
Let me stop you there, because permission to play sounds like more jargon. Give me a concrete example. How does a value statement actually help a hospital floor run better on a Tuesday at 2 a.m. when they're short-staffed?
Okay, so it acts as an automatic filter. Let's say a hospital's looking for a new vendor for IV tubing, right? And a company comes in offering a massive 20% discount.
Which the finance team obviously loves.
Exactly. But their supply chain is notoriously unreliable, and there are whispers of quality control issues. If the hospital's relentlessly enforced core value is uncompromising patient safety above all metrics, that vendor fails the permission to play evaluation instantly.
They don't even get a meeting.
Right, regardless of the savings. And for that nurse at 2 a.m., when resources are stretched thin, values dictate prioritization.
So if there's a conflict between rushing to meet a turnaround time metric that management is pushing versus taking an extra 10 minutes to strictly follow an infection control protocol.
The value statement empowers the nurse to choose safety, and it protects them from reprisal for missing the time metric. But that only works if the leadership actually backs it up.
Yeah, if management says safety first but secretly penalizes nurses for being slow, the whole thing just breeds incredible cynicism.
That's the fatal flaw. A mission or vision isn't just a poster. It must be, quote, relentlessly indoctrinated. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the C-suite has to fiercely defend those values, especially when it costs them money.
So assuming we have leadership that walks the walk, how do they diagnose the health of the hospital to build the actual strategy?
That's the SWOT analysis. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Right. And it's important to understand the mechanical distinction here. Strengths and weaknesses are internal trends. You theoretically have control over them.
Yes, your highly trained nursing staff is an internal strength. Your archaic IT system that constantly crashes is an internal weakness.
But opportunities and threats are external forces. You cannot control them. A new surgical center opening down the street is a threat. A federal grant for telehealth is an opportunity.
Precisely. You synthesize all that into your competitive positioning, which leads to strategic initiatives, or SIs. These are multi-year targets for long-term viability that bridge the gap between your present mission and your future vision.
But here is the massive roadblock. You can have a brilliant strategy on paper, right? But a strategy on paper is useless without the human element to drive it. Paper doesn't administer medication.
No, it certainly doesn't.
How do executives actually get the frontline staff to care? That brings us to Section 3, which is aligning people and operations, execution and monitoring.
And this is entirely rooted in psychology. The frameworks break this down into organizational alignment. Do employees accept the mission? And role alignment.
Role alignment is fascinating. The slides talk about balancing a person's natural behavioral drives with their actual duties.
Right. It utilizes something called the deliberately developmental approach and a self-governance model. It's grounded in human motivation theory. The idea is to give employees choices rather than just modifying their behavior like they're misbehaving children.
But this raises a really uncomfortable point in the slides. They analyze the specific need to separate technical management from behavioral management.
Oh, this is a brutal truth in healthcare.
It really is. The slides mention utilizing expert behavioral coaches because, and this is wild, most managers lack the skills for behavioral modification. Just because you're a phenomenal trauma nurse doesn't mean you know how to manage human psychology.
Exactly. Promoting your best clinician to manager is a classic mistake if you don't give them a completely new toolkit. So you bring in behavioral coaches to handle the conflicts, mediation, and developmental counseling, freeing the clinical manager to focus on operational excellence.
It's a very modern approach. So we have the strategy, we have the people aligned. How do we operationalize it day to day?
Through tactical planning. You translate the strategy into annual tactical maps with specific target completion deadlines and owners. Someone's name has to be next to the project.
If everyone is responsible, no one is responsible.
Exactly. And this leads us to budgeting, which is a vital link between strategy and reality.
Right. You have operating budgets for daily stuff and capital budgets for the big things. The models usually define a capital budget as financial outlays of $1,000 or more per item.
And you monitor this execution through profit sharing, non-financial incentives like value spotlights, personal dashboards, and snapshot reviews.
But I want to highlight the concept of safeguards to prevent cheating or gaming in these incentive programs, because the slides explicitly call this out.
It's a fundamental law of organizational design. You get exactly what you measure.
Right. It's like a video game. If you only reward players for collecting gold coins, they'll completely ignore saving the princess just to farm coins. You have to measure the right things.
If you incentivize ER staff purely on a metric of time from door to bed under 30 minutes without safeguards, what happens?
They game it. They pull the patient into a hallway gurney at minute 29. The patient hasn't seen a doctor, they're just occupying a bed in the hallway. Metric met, bonus paid, but the care is actually worse.
Which is why metrics key performance indicators, or KPIs, must cascade logically from the top down to individual contributor roles.
The linchpin between all this strategy and reality is the budget. And you cannot run a capital budget without understanding how the value of a dollar changes over time.
You absolutely cannot.
Which requires stepping entirely out of the clinical comfort zone.
And this is the threshold for our DNP students.
Right, which brings us to the micro view. The lecture transcript we have on the time value of money. or TVM. And I have to say, the tone of the literature here is phenomenal.
It's very direct.
Yeah. They explicitly tell these nursing students that this is knowledge everyone should know. They acknowledge it might be really uncomfortable, but they urge them to, quote, do something hard to grow.
I love that.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about the emotional hurdle here for a healthcare professional facing finance.
It's massive.
The lecturer keeps repeating, do something hard.
Huh.
It's fascinating that a nurse who might perform complex, life-saving procedures every single day is being told that an Excel spreadsheet is the hard thing they need to push through.
It just perfectly highlights the completely different skill sets. In the clinical world, biological rules apply. In the boardroom, mathematical rules apply.
And the fundamental premise of TBM, the bedrock of this math, is that today's value is not the same as tomorrow's value.
Right. To explain this, the lecturer sets up this foundational example. Imagine your father offers you a choice. He says, I will give you $1,000 today, or I will give you $1,100 exactly 1 year from now. Which do you choose?
Intuitively, a lot of people just look at the absolute numbers and say, well, 1,100 is bigger, I'll just wait a year.
But the financial answer isn't automatic. It depends entirely on your available rate of return, meaning your interest rate.
Because there's an opportunity cost to waiting.
Exactly. If you can take that $1,000 today and invest it in a hot stock, like they mentioned Apple or Google, that might yield a 100% return. Your 1,000 turns into 2,000. So you obviously take the money today.
Or even just a standard solid 12% return.
Right. If you get 12%, you make $120 in interest. You end the year with $1,120, which mathematically beats your father's offer of $1,100. So you take the money today.
But the flip side is true too. If you can only get a boring savings account yield of 1 to 5%, you can't generate that extra $100 yourself. So the math says you wait a year for the $1,100.
The intrinsic value of the money is completely tethered to the interest rate.
Now, to help DNPs bypass the anxiety of complex high school algebra formulas, the lecturer introduces this brilliant tool. They call it a financial abacus.
It's essentially a custom template tool designed to practically apply these concepts to their businesses and personal lives without getting bogged down in the raw math.
So how does this financial abacus actually work? Let's get into the mechanics of how money travels through time. We have some core terms to define first.
All right, the vocabulary. First is PV, which stands for present value. That's today's value.
Then FV, future value. That's tomorrow's value.
Then we have I, which represents the interest rate, and N, which is the number of time periods.
And before we move money through time, the lecturer makes a vital distinction between simple interest and compound interest. I want to use a medical metaphor here.
Oh, please do.
Simple interest is like a localized cut on your arm. It hurts, but it's contained, it's linear. Compound interest is like a systemic infection. It feeds on itself and grows exponentially.
That is a visceral but highly accurate metaphor. Simple interest means earning a flat amount. If you deposit $100 at 5% simple interest, every single year you receive exactly $5. It grows in a flat line.
But compound interest means earning interest on your interest.
Right. So year one is the same. You get $5 ending with 105 cents. But in year two, the interest is calculated on the new balance of 105 cents. So you get $5.25. As the lecturer puts it, money makes money, which makes more money.
And when we use this to move money, we use compounding and discounting. Compounding is knowing today's value and finding tomorrow's. Discounting is knowing tomorrow's value and finding out what it's worth today.
And the visual tool they recommend is the timeline.
It's like a time machine for your wallet. Compounding is sending your money into the future to work for you. Discounting is dragging future money back to today to see if it's actually worth your time right now.
And on the timeline, cash outflows, money leaving your pocket, like giving a friend a $10,000 loan today, are negative numbers. Cash inflows getting $6,000 back at year one and year two are positive numbers.
Let's run some of the source's exact examples through the abacus. Future value first. $100 at 8% for 5 years.
So you plug that in. PV is negative 100, I is 8, N is 5. The future value is $146.93.
Solid. But if we change it to a 12% stock market return for 30 years...
The numbers explode. That single $100 bill grows to $2,995.99.
Almost $3,000. But the lecturer highlights the danger of daily compounding here. That $3,000 is compounded annually. What if we compound it daily, like 365 periods a year?
This is why credit cards are so dangerous. If you run that same $100 at 12% over 30 years, compounded daily, It is astronomically higher. The systemic infection takes over.
Let's look at discounting, or present value. The example is a guy named Paul who wants to buy a contract paying $1,700 8 years from now. The interest rate he could get elsewhere is 6%.
So we discount that future $1,700 back to today. If V is 1,700, I is 6, N is 8. The most he should pay today is 1,066 Sexors.
Because if he invests $766 at 6% for 8 years, it turns into exactly $1,700 anyway. It gives you an objective baseline for negotiation.
But single lumps of cash are easy to understand. What happens when the cash is a steady stream, like a salary or a recurring budget item?
That brings us to the power of annuities. An annuity is defined as a constant stream of equal payments.
And we should briefly differentiate between an ordinary annuity and an annuity due.
Right. Ordinary means the cash flow occurs at the end of the period, which is the default assumption in finance. Annuity due is at the beginning of the period, which yields slightly more interest because it sits in the account longer.
Let's look at the future value of an annuity example, saving for retirement.
The classic example.
The lecturer says, what if you contribute $5,000 every single year for 30 years at a 10% interest rate?
Using the abacus, it yields $822,470.11. Just steady, consistent saving. But the present value of an annuity is where it gets dramatic. The expert dives into 2 real-world applications from the text.
The first is the lottery. You win a $300 million lottery.
The dream.
But it's paid as an annuity. $10 million a year for 30 years. What happens if you take the lump sum today?
People always think the government is stealing from them when they see the lump sum. But assuming an 8% interest rate, the present value of that $300 million stream is only $112 million. The expert breaks down the illusion of the $300 million headline. It's just time value.
Exactly. If the state keeps that $112 million and invests it at 8%, they use the interest to pay you your $10 million a year.
The math balances perfectly. The second example is much darker, though. It's calculating the financial value of a human life.
The grim but fascinating example of a 32-year-old dentist who dies in a car accident.
Right. To calculate compensation for the family, the court looks at the variables. 30 working years left until age 62. Average salary is $180,000.
Assuming no inflation and an 8% interest rate, what is the present value of that life's earnings?
The abacus calculates it as roughly $2 million. It's a bit jarring, right? To reduce a human life to a present value calculation.
The lecturer actually jokes that you have to go to church to find the meaning of life, but in finance, this is exactly how we do it.
And as a healthcare leader, you have to understand this cold calculus because this is how courts and insurance companies operate.
We've looked at massive numbers, 112 million lotteries and 2 million life valuations. But how does a DNP apply this to everyday life?
Let's talk real estate, mortgages, and everyday applications. First is an annuity equaling a future value. This is calculating required deposits.
Example 1. You want to save for a $30,000 house down payment in exactly 5 years, and your bank pays 6%.
The abacus says the required annual deposit is $5,321.89. Or you could just drop a lump sum of $22,241 today and let it grow.
Example 2 is the famous latte factor applied to becoming a millionaire.
I love this one.
To get $1 million in 30 years at a 7% return, you need to save $10,586.40 a year.
Which sounds like a lot, but broken down, it's $819.69 a month. Or, changing the compounding periods to daily, it's just $26.77 a day. It completely demystifies wealth building.
And finally, annuity equaling a present value, calculating loan or mortgage payments.
Buying a $100,000 warehouse with 20% down, you borrow the remaining $80,000 at 8% for 30 years.
The annual payment is $7,106.19. But the expert speaker in the transcript does this incredible deep dive comparing a 30-year versus a 15-year residential mortgage.
This is so important. They use rates sourced from highcentral.com for a $200,000 loan.
The 30-year rate is 3.932%. The monthly payment is $947.01.
What's fascinating here is how people fall into a psychological trap.
Oh, absolutely. They see the $947 versus $1,423 and instantly choose the 30-year because it feels more affordable month to month.
But while the 15-year costs about $550 more per month, the total interest paid over the life of the loan is much, much cheaper. You save nearly $85,000 in interest just by compressing the timeline. This is why financial advisors recommend it if you can afford the cash flow. If you're a nurse opening a new clinic, understanding this isn't just about personal wealth.
No, it's business survival.
It's the difference between signing a lease Or taking a commercial loan that will bankrupt your practice under compound interest versus one that builds long-term equity.
So true.
So we've covered a massive amount of ground today. We started with a frustrated nurse left out of decision-making and ended with the financial abacus that unlocks the boardroom doors.
Strategic planning gives you the map, and the time value of money tells you exactly how much the fuel will cost.
So what does this all mean? I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder based on everything we've read today.
Okay.
The sources noted that nurses aren't seen as revenue generators, but what if a DNP took these exact formulas, the time value of money and discounting, and applied them to preventative nursing care?
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
If a specialized nursing intervention saves a hospital $100,000 in future readmission costs 5 years from now, a DNP armed with this financial math could calculate the exact present value of that nursing care today.
They could mathematically prove the return on investment of a nurse's salary.
Exactly. Could mastering this financial language finally flip the narrative, transforming how hospital boards view nursing departments from being just an operating expense to being measurable, quantifiable drivers of financial value?
That is a very powerful question.
Thank you so much to the learner for joining this deep dive. We encourage you to play with your own financial abacus, start running the numbers, and claim your seat at the table. Until next time.